Part 2. What really happens? Chapter 5. Where the will comes from. Reality does not change to fit our pride. Pride is what must shrink. Leo Tolstoy. After understanding that the choice could not have been different under the same conditions, the discomfort usually shifts to another point. If we did not choose differently because we were exactly who we were in that instant, then an inevitable question arises. Where did the will that supported that choice come from? This question is more uncomfortable than it seems, because it pushes us beyond the idea of control at an even deeper level. It is no longer only about action, but about wanting itself. When we observe everyday experience honestly, something simple becomes unavoidable. The will appears. It is not summoned. It does not ask permission. At some moment in the day, we feel hunger, tiredness, irritation, the desire to speak, to be silent, to leave, to insist. When we notice it, the will is already there. We do not choose to feel will. We perceive it. This becomes even clearer when we deal with deep desires. No one chooses whom they fall in love with, what they fear, what excites them, or what intensely displeases them. These forces arise as the result of a complex combination of body, history, experiences, environment, and circumstance. They are not the product of conscious deliberation. They simply emerge. At this point, many people try to preserve some space of control by saying that, although we do not choose the will, we choose what to do with it. And that is true, in part. But this truth must be examined carefully. When we resist a will, what really happens is not its disappearance, but a conflict. One desire collides with another. Impulse against fear, pleasure against consequence, curiosity against rule. The final action is the result of this clash. And the winner of this conflict is not chosen freely. It is determined by the relative strength of these wills in that moment. Even self-control does not arise from nothing. It depends on factors such as emotional maturity, past experiences, education, social support, and physical and mental state. Two people can feel the same impulse and yet have completely different degrees of capacity to resist it. And neither of them chose to have that capacity. Here something fundamental begins to appear. We do not choose either the arising of the will or the degree of freedom we have to deal with it. Think again of simple situations. The will to shout can arise in someone exhausted and in someone rested. The will is similar, but the degree of freedom to contain it is completely different. The same is true of addictions, impulses, difficult decisions, moral conflicts. What changes is not only the will, but the internal structure that does, or does not, allow it to be transformed into action. Laws, morality, religion, customs, education, and social context enter here as decisive elements. They do not create the will, but they profoundly shape the space in which it may or may not be realized. A will can exist fully and still be almost entirely prevented from expressing itself. In another context, the same will finds open ground and is realized without conflict. This shows something essential. The freedom of the will is not an absolute attribute of the individual. It is a relation between what arises within us and the internal and external conditions that allow or prevent its realization. This recognition usually generates a second discomfort. If we do not choose what we want, and we do not choose the degree of freedom we have to deal with what we want, then what remains of control? The answer is not emptiness. It is something more refined. When we abandon the illusion of absolute control, we begin to see the real functioning of consciousness. The will stops being an enemy or a moral mystery and becomes understood as a natural phenomenon that can be educated, transformed, and reorganized over time, provided the conditions change. Real change does not happen by internal decree. It happens when experiences, consequences, learnings, and contexts alter the structure that gives rise to wills. That is why suffering teaches, time matures, and environment transforms. Not because we magically choose to change, but because we were changed. Here, again, discomfort fulfills its role. It tears the last layer of the illusion of total control. But in doing so, It opens space for something more honest, a deeper understanding of justice. If we do not choose the origin of the will, then a justice that punishes as if everyone started from the same point makes no sense. But a justice that educates, that transforms, that creates conditions so that other wills can arise in the future, that makes complete sense. What seemed like loss begins to reveal itself as refinement. Responsibility does not disappear, it changes place. It ceases to be a charge for the impossible and becomes a commitment to real transformation. Each consciousness in each moment does exactly what it can do in that instant. Not because it is perfect, but because it could not be anything else at that point in its history. Admitting this does not impoverish life. On the contrary, it makes it more intelligible, more just, and, paradoxically, more compassionate. The initial discomfort is inevitable. It exists to tear the illusion that we control the origin of wanting. But it is not the destination. On the other side, something more beautiful appears. The perception that understanding the mechanism of things does not destroy meaning. It deepens it. In the next chapter, we will go even further along this path, showing that even what we call control over ourselves is part of this same mechanism. And yet, far from reducing us, this returns to us a form of dignity more solid than the fantasy of absolute control. For now, it is enough to keep this simple and difficult idea. The will arises, freedom varies, and life unfolds within those conditions, not against them. Everything that follows is born from this understanding.